So I'm here with Harry Hurd. Harry and Harry's organisation, Clear Honest Design, have been working with us at Scope for about 6 months. And someone put on the meetup about kind of how to do accessibility and actually some kind of, maybe I'm inspired to do it, but then how do I start with inclusive design and making a product accessible? So we're going to do a bit of a Q&A, and hopefully Harry will answer some of those questions and give you some helpful information for you to go and take into your own work. It sounded very interesting. Oh, what's the word? It sounded great when I said this to Harry earlier, but I don't have it in the same context now. But I guess for me, a big part of what we're doing in the Big Hack is making accessibility accessible. Like something that we found is that it can feel like a concept that's a bit over there, and actually people tend to be kind and they want to make their product accessible. They want to know that disabled people can use it, but actually the challenges is then going about and doing that. So hopefully that's what the Big Hack will achieve for product teams and businesses. So, too many slides, right. So, I'm going to ask Harry some questions, and then I'd love for you guys to ask him any questions you might have. So, as a start, what's inclusive design, Harry?
Oh, thanks, Krissie, for the setup. I didn't know what was coming. So, a little bit of context is, so we've been working on building the products and the websites for the Big Hack and doing all the thinking around it. And in no way would I ever claim to be an accessibility expert. Before getting involved with Krissie in the Big Hack, a lot of the websites we built now don't meet the same standards of inclusive design that I would hold myself accountable to going forward. And for me, inclusive design is entirely consistent with the broad principles of design generally. How can you make products and services that are joyous and work for as many people as possible and make their lives as easy as possible? The concept of design is not designing for yourself, it's finding a problem for other people and then solving it. And so, for me, inclusive design is just an extension of being a good designer or developer or whatever you do, and making it as amazing and as frictionless an experience for as wide an audience as possible. Because as someone who makes things, ultimately, no one wants to make something that makes someone's life harder or is difficult or is frustrating. And so inclusive design just means widening the field of empathy and applying it to people who may not be like you or may not be in your situation at that time, and just making it as good as possible.
So I'd be interested, did you always have that approach as a designer, or is it more recent since you've been working with Scope? So
we, as an agency, we only work with people who do good in the world and want to make the world a better place. And so we had the broad concept of empathy. A lot of the clients we were working with, the people they were reaching had very different experiences that we may not have had. And another of the qualities in any good designer or agency or team, ultimately, I think, is humility as well. To accept that you might not know everything, but then taking the time and the effort to understand it. That's what fundamentally makes designers worthwhile. It's not the technical skill, it's not the ability necessarily to implement it, it's the ability to ask the right questions, to understand people's experiences which aren't your own. And so we had areas of it, even so around accessibility. So I've long thought about colour and contrast, and making sure that everything can be has as high a contrast as possible for people with low vision, and other areas broadly where principles of good design, or especially in web development, say user experience, what's great for general usability for everyone also happens to be really good for accessibility for the disabled community. So within UX, everyone says that you should try and reduce the number of fields in a form as much as possible, because it's a pain. And if you can take 20 seconds off someone's experience of filling out a form, that's great. But then if you widen that out to the disabled community, what could be 20 seconds to the designer filling it out or the developer could be 2 minutes or 10 minutes to someone who takes longer to fill out forms. So the improvements and advancements that you have there benefit everyone, regardless of their ability.
Cool. So in the Big Hack, we talk about inclusive design as what we want people to kind of be learning about and engage with. And part of that is accessibility. But I think the two concepts really overlap and can be used to mean the same thing. So just from your perspective, how do inclusive design and accessibility differ?
So, as you say, obviously people can use them interchangeably, and a lot of the time they mean the same thing. But to me, accessibility is a kind of after the fact bit. You design something for an audience that you imagine, and then at the end of it you go, but how can I make sure that everyone can use it? And that's, to me, you're missing a step if you're doing that. The trick is to think right from the beginning, how can I design this in its most basic conception so that it works for absolutely everyone and is a joy. And the beauty of design and development is designing and developing with constraints, right? It's seeing a challenge and then finding the best way to combat that. How can you make the most beautiful design? How can you make the most usable product, the most effective thing, given these constraints? And I think too often from a design community and development community, including myself historically, I've looked past what can be sometimes seen as more of a challenge of designing for a wider range of people. And as a consequence, I've made something that's not as good, because even if ultimately the solution, which I found from doing the Big Hack projects, isn't that tough, even just that process of asking yourself to think wider in that early stage means that you'll make something that's better for everyone, regardless of their ability.
Cool. Just to add some context to that, Harry's initial task with us was to design a reporting tool, which I'll have a link to it at the end, but basically this tool is something that people can use to report when they have an inaccessible or non-inclusive online experience, which could also span to an offline experience. So for example, booking an Uber and then you go to get in the Uber and that's completely inaccessible. So this tool really helps us gather a lot of data and stories about what the digital world is like for disabled people, and that's how we're really kind of gearing where we take this program and what we're trying to change with it. So Harry designed this inclusively. It was a design challenge. It was relatively new. What I think is really interesting and could be an interesting point for the audience is that you have since gone back to websites you've designed for previous clients and made them accessible where they weren't. And actually I think for a lot of people in this audience, they're probably working with particularly charity websites is stuff that's been around for a really long time, and there's probably got loads and loads of pages and the sitemap's like chaos. So what would your advice be in terms of going back to things and then making them accessible?
So that's what we're doing, and sometimes I'm sure lots of people, especially developers here, if you open an old website independently of accessibility, you look at it and go, oh my God, I cannot believe I built this. This is awful. Whose code is this? Then you realise it's yours as you spot traits on it. But I think the main thing from our perspective when we were doing this is it can be daunting with the idea that you have to do it all, perfectly and in one go, and then because of that, you end up not doing any of it. And ultimately, small steps get you closer to the end goal, and once you start it, you find that you become really engaged in it and you want to, do everything as best as you can. So we've got loads of websites, you know, that are out there that now if I was building them, I'd build them to a higher standard. And I'm not, you know, chastising myself and staying up till 5 o'clock in the morning every night, desperate to make it perfect. I'm just working through them, you know, as I can, making them as accessible as possible. And, you know, crucial from my perspective in that, it's not something that, it's not a marketing opportunity, it's not a way to, you know, get in contact with old clients. It's just fundamentally the right thing to do, you know, because I have the ability and the skills to do that because I've become more aware and hopefully through this whole process become slightly more empathetic. And so now I know what the impacts are of not doing it. And so by going back through the site, even if they're the people who own the sites never knew it was an issue in the first place and had never thought of it, it could be affecting people who really need their services, especially in the charity world and non-profit and people trying to make a difference. The idea that it simultaneously can exclude people is something that I think everyone, both from within those charities or businesses, and more importantly from the people who should have the pride and responsibility for having built those products, should want them to be as accessible and open and inclusive as they can be.
Cool. It's like he's been reborn as an A1Y advocate.
Yes, exactly.
So I'm going to ask if anyone in the audience has any questions for Harry or me.
On that last point of going back and reworking clients' websites, I presume you did that with their permission, you didn't just change them and stuff?
No. Yeah, I let them know. I asked them first. I did say, hey, I'm really sorry, but what we did before doesn't meet our new standards. Okay. Would you mind very much if I fix them? And so far they've all said yes, which is lovely.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
Be bad to say no.
Well, we have a question.
Ooh.
Krissie, what is Scope's The Big Hack?
I did say before this second half, I haven't really explained what Scope is or The Big Hack, so sorry about that. So basically, Scope is a campaigning organisation, fairly similar to Leonard Cheshire but UK focused, and Leonard Cheshire runs services. We work quite closely with government in terms of campaigning and getting legislation changed. We also work closely with businesses to make sure that they have the best kind of practice in employing disabled people. And now we have another strategic theme, which is digital. And we also work in the area of financial security for disabled people and best start in life for young disabled children, families of disabled children. The digital bit, as I said, began about a year ago. And basically, The Big Hack seeks to work with the tech community, with businesses and with disabled people to bridge gaps that exist in between. We're doing this, I'm a service designer, well, previously was a service designer, so doing this in a really user-centered way. The idea is that we have identified the people that we need to influence, and then we really want to get to know them and understand what will influence them. So instead of telling them they should practice inclusive design and create accessible products, we hope to inspire them. And in doing that, we're building a resource hub, and we're really opening that out to the design community. I hate this comparison, but we're calling it the BuzzFeed for inclusive design, but I can't think of any other way of describing it. We also have our reporting tool, so what that does is it helps us find out where the key barriers are in the digital world that disabled people are experiencing, and we can really tell a story with that, so we can actually go to businesses and say, these are people's experiences on your website, actually, and this is the impact of it. And out of that, we're going to make a film, and that will be That will be ready for November when we fully launch the big hack, and the film will show like a day in the life of people experiencing different barriers to tech. And actually it will show you how the time and money tots up when you're experiencing those barriers throughout your life. I mean, not booking a flight through price comparison websites means that you probably have to phone up and spend a heck of a lot more on booking your flight, and that's just like one tiny example. We're also working with open inclusion. I think Tom's here somewhere. Oh, there he is. Hi, Tom. So we're working with open inclusion, and we are building, this is really long, sorry, but we're building the business case for inclusive design. So the idea is that we work with product teams, but we can also work with senior people in businesses and organisations to demonstrate that there's real commercial and ethical value in practicing inclusive design. And that business case is going to be super jazzy because Tom is a genius. Basically, we're looking at combining different data sets to look at the spending patterns between disabled and non-disabled people in different industries. And then we're doing a lot of qualitative work to understand why that is, so we can ultimately demonstrate to people who are working in specific industries the opportunity that they're missing out on by not practicing inclusive design. If that wasn't very eloquent and didn't make sense, then I will be hanging around afterwards so I can explain it. Or actually, no, ask Tom, because he can probably explain it much better. But yeah, that's the big hack, and hopefully it will be going across many years and evolving in many forms.
And just to add to it, the approach the whole way is that when you go on and you look at it, if you've got suggestions or ideas of how it can be improved, or you've got skills that you can contribute or anything, we want to hear all of it. We're not sensitive. If you say that's rubbish, it can be done better, then tell us, and we want to make it as impactful and effective as possible.
Yeah, just be brutally honest.
Yeah.
That's the way best products or services or programs occur. Brutal honesty.
Yeah.
Tear us down. I think you have a question.
Yeah, it was just to ask about the reporting tool that you mentioned. I don't know if you were going to talk about that anyway, but it sounded really interesting, and wanted to know kind of what that process looked like and how you, if at all, managed to make it inclusive in terms of the way you actually designed it.
Yeah, so it was quite a challenge, because to build a kind of essentially like a feedback tool, like a survey, that was both really engaging and hopefully a bit more fun than just a dry, kind of standard tick box affair. But to make it as inclusive as it possibly could be, it was a massive learning curve for us, and it basically involved us. So we designed it, we ran workshops with different user groups with kind of pan disabilities to see what their inputs were and how they would use this thing, and what their feedback was. And then actually, so in the designing process, that came into it, and trying to be as kind of open as possible, of thinking, right, with someone with a really short amount of time, how can you do what can be quite a complex form as simply as they possibly can. And then from the technological side of developing it, it's the first time that I've ever navigated more than just kind of like a standard website using, say, just VoiceOver or screen readers. And so learning how to use them and seeing the pitfalls of the way that I had designed and developed things previously, and then iterating and improving on it. Luckily, the Scope kind of accessibility review team is amazing. So they told me the errors that I'd made, which I could then learn from and iterate on. And again, beyond that, it's not just the technological side or the visual design or the UX. Then you get to content of wording, and that has to be accessible. And again, that, like I was saying earlier, in terms of improving the skill set generally, coming from the accessible viewpoint, it's amazing where the focus is on how can you write in a way that absolutely everyone can understand, and you're not using any jargon, you're not using flowery language, you're not, doing all that kind of stuff. And it's amazing, and it's made me better already. And I know that I've got a long way to go, and to learn and to continually improve. but that focus of thinking about how can you design for all makes it better for everyone. And so the tool, we're just about to, so we've had version 1 out there, and we're going to be going to version 2 relatively soon, learning from our experiences on the first version of it. But yeah, it was great. It was, more than anything, it was fun to do. You know, it was that bit I said before of designing with constraints is the fun bit. You know, that's the bit where you get a challenge and you go, okay, how can I do this? How can I still make it look, in my mind, beautiful and be as accessible as it possibly can be? So hopefully, well, we'll wait for version 2.
I almost don't want anyone to look at it before version 2. It's always the thing where you have a product and you're like, yeah, this is amazing. And then you see how people are using it, and then you redesign it and you're like, no, this is amazing. And you're like, no one look at the old one, the new one's coming.
And then version 3 will come.
Oh my God, it'll just blow all our minds.
No, but so the general idea of it is, so our initial instinct was that we wanted to get as much quantitative data as we could, you know, because obviously it's online, it can go to everyone. And then through people using the first version, we realised that actually some of the really powerful outputs that we got from it was the qualitative side of hearing people's stories who might not necessarily have answered a different questionnaire or gone to a user research group, but we were hearing these stories that were really impactful. And so what we've done is in the second version is say, okay, well, how can we set that up as well so that we're getting more of those really impactful stories, which, okay, we might not have all of the quantitative side and in those particular questions, but we're still getting stories that need to be heard.
Thank you.
Hello. I had a question, especially being so new in terms of your evolution and progression in the space of inclusive design and development. What sorts of tools do you use in terms of your daily work, either from a design or development perspective? Nothing beats great user testing and user research and talking to subject matter experts, but they're not normally sitting in a huddle right next to you waiting to be asked the question.
Yeah.
There's lots of design and development work that's happening in between. So what sorts of tools are your daily drivers?
In terms of inclusive design?
In terms of inclusive design and development.
Yeah. So yeah, this is a really good question. So on its like the baseline, you know, there's the kind of accessibility review tools. So like in Chrome, they've got the audits for accessibility, Wave from WebAIM. There's things like that where you can get the kind of the base level, and often, especially going through other sites, those can be a good jumping off point, you know, to have those discussions. Internally within our agency, because we've all talked a lot about this and grappled with the idea of, okay, what does it mean to design inclusively? What don't we know from our experiences, and what are we missing? We've read a lot of blogs from people both within the disabled community talking about their experiences of using websites and pulling out patterns and saying, okay, do we recognise any of that within our own sites?
I'm just going to chime in here. I think Harry was really lucky in the sense that he was working with Scope. So he did already have a community of disabled people to access, and I totally accept that that's a real challenge for other designers and developers. So it's a massive issue and barrier that we know of is actually just lack of access to disabled people. So your attention might be there, but co-design might feel something that's very far away. And you know, I don't have an answer for that, like especially with safeguarding stuff. So I mean, what I would say is when I was my previous life built an app for women with breast cancer, and the challenge really was just not being able to find women with breast cancer because it wasn't in my network. And I was in a breast cancer charity, but there were all kinds of processes, and I was like, I just want to chat with them, like just for a starting point. I want to get this done now. Well, in the end, we phoned up someone's grandma with permission, and she had had breast cancer and was in a breast cancer group. And that way we could talk to loads of people with breast cancer. And I think with health conditions and with disability, there are lots of groups that it probably would just take a Google to find out about a certain DPO who you can chat with, that's Disabled People's Organisation, and they would be so willing to share. So if you're designing for deaf and hard of hearing, Deaf Unity is one, for example, who are literally just on the other end of the phone and absolutely happy to share and test things. So I think it's a little bit of motivation to do your own research, but get in touch with DPOs, and without a doubt you'll have people who are happy to share their learning. Or come to Scope, and we can also help you out, but we do charge.
Hi, my question is around, so the compliance laws are under A, AA and AAA, and then there's usability, which concerns, I presume, inclusive design. So what do you prioritize, like going from AA compliance to AAA, or the usability aspect? I mean, what I understand is that users, they may not be very comfortable with like the AAA compliant things may not be as user friendly. So how do you? What do you?
So I might be viewed as quite controversial here. I think WCAG minimum standard is really, really useful, but I think the best thing you can do is product test. And like I was saying, like get in touch with DPOs, or come to Scope, or just use Twitter, ask people to test stuff. Be really open and honest, like social media is really useful for this. I think once you get sucked into WCAG and trying to get better and better, you get further away from the people that you're actually designing for. That's just my opinion. I mean, Harry might feel different.
No, I think that's true. Like it's all about empathy, right? And it's hard to kind of boil down an almost infinite range of people's experiences down to like a guideline set. I think the most fundamental thing here is like humility. Right, you don't have to get it right every single time. The only thing you have to do is be open to exploring whether something you've built isn't as inclusive as it could be, and not taking it as a criticism or a personal failing if you haven't done it, but as an opportunity to learn from it and then do better going forward. And as long as you're asking the right questions, as long as you're genuinely interested in hearing what other people's opinions and experiences in using your product or service or whatever you've made is, then ultimately you're on the right track. And it's just, as Krissie said, just speaking to as many different people with different experiences as yourself as you can.
Yeah, and actually one thing that really is really frustrating, and that we're getting a lot through our reporting tool about, is that there is no two-way conversation between businesses and their users. And actually that is how you really make a great thing, like make a great service, is by opening up a feedback loop. And through our reporting tool, we hear a lot that, I'm experiencing this barrier, I can't check out, or I can't book this thing, and I look for a contact number, contact email, and it wasn't there. Or when it is there, I contacted them, and then they just say, accessibility is on the roadmap. And that's what really makes me sad, because I'm like, this stuff is gold dust, actually. It's quite rare that someone comes to you and says, I'm experienced. People normally just go off your website and move away. So I think just to change that thinking for businesses is actually, that feedback loop is really something special, and you should nurture that rather than just saying it's on the backlog or not picking up. Okay, we've got 2 minutes.
How do you know that?
Huh? I'm magic.
That's amazing. Oh, okay, you're over there. Oh, okay, that's how. I was really impressed.
Krissie, you both talked about this tool that you've put together for people to be able to flag accessibility issues and usability issues that come across. Now, is there any way for people like me to get access to some of these nuggets of information, because it would really help me bring things to life for my colleagues.
Absolutely. So I think the idea in the big hack is that it's totally open. We want to share the information we gather. Any barriers and trends and stories that we pick up through this reporting tool, we want to be there for, for people to use as challenges, like design challenges. So, I mean, we're building the website. Like, we can't build it fast enough, to be honest. But on the website, hopefully we'll open out all that information. For now, you can email me at bighack.org.uk, and I have a PowerPoint, an accessible PowerPoint that shows a lot of the stories and the data that we're picking up that I can send to absolutely anyone who wants it. And I'm sending it off to, YouGov did a hackathon around the whole thing, which was like just the best thing ever. It's all over Twitter if you want to look it up. And Expedia are doing one as well. So yeah, we're totally open to people picking up on this stuff.
It'd be really interesting actually to have a conversation about what it is that you think would be most useful for convincing your colleagues and talking to them. Because all of this kind of stuff and people who are going to use it in the real world is how we can then, build the next versions and see what do people want, what do people need, what's going to be the most effective and impactful. So definitely.
Right. I think we all probably want to either get home or to the pub. So thanks for being a really awesome audience. That was really enjoyable, and we're around and happy to chat further. Thank you.